Hello everyone, welcome back to Unraveling Politics, a weekly political analysis show. I'm feeling a little bit better, still a little bit stuffy. It's because of some allergies. So hopefully this episode sounds a little bit more normal than last one. Before we go on, I'd like to let you know and remind you that I have a memoir that I wrote over the summer about my life and my time in college, which is coming to a close very soon. I'm going to talk about that a little bit at the end. And if that's something you're interested in reading, please check out the link in the description. Additionally, tomorrow on December 2nd, I'm publishing a second book. This one is a fiction book for young adult readers. It's based around a summer camp, and it has some faith, mystery, and all that stuff tied into it. Both will be available down below. It's not published as of the release of this episode, December the 1st, but it will be available on December 2nd, so the link will be there. And, of course, there's no pressure, as always. At the same time, if you have Kindle Unlimited, it is a free download. Thanks for your support, as always. All right, everyone, I hope you had a great Thanksgiving. If you live in the States, and if you don't, then I hope you had a great weekend. We are in the run-up to Christmas now. Usually this is the time of year that politics tends to slow down, and I can always tell that because it's usually when the views start to drop off. And so we're going to kind of cover what's going on. It's still pretty busy, but over the next few weeks, I expect the episodes to be a little bit shorter than usual. So this week there is a lot to talk about, even though there was the Thanksgiving break. And we're going to get to the Ukraine story. That is probably our most important story. We're going to get to that in a little bit. The proposal is, as I said, our lead story, but there's a few other smaller stories that I want to cover first. So first we have a special election in Tennessee tomorrow on December 2nd. Normally this would be a safe Republican seat, and it wouldn't be one that we would talk about. This was a district that Trump won by over 20 points. It was 22%. But Emerson College released a poll showing Republican Matt Van Epps just 2 points ahead of Democrat Afti Ben. And I believe I said that right. It's 48 to 46% with 5% undecided. Therefore, I'm thinking this will be a tight race, and that's something that most political pundits have agreed with me on that one, or I am agreeing with them. As I said last week, all the makings of a bad midterm are here except a recession. And in this mostly rural and urban district in Tennessee, there's a little bit of mix of both, that could further confirm that. It's a district that holds parts of western Nashville, which is a city, and it goes from the top to the bottom of the state. Even if Republicans win it by 5, 10%, even 15%, I think 15 would be on the high end. I think it's going to be around 10%, maybe as low as 5. I really think 2% is not likely. This is a must-win seat. If Democrats win this seat, or at least close the gap, then it will show that they're in the ascendancy nationally. In short, this is a must-win seat, as I said, for Republicans to hold on to the House. On the flip side, it is not a swing district, as I have said, so this is not a must-win seat for Democrats. But this is the kind of district where they'd be looking to make at least a little bit of inroads in. In the near term, the balance of power in the House is 213 to 219. Now, normally we wouldn't care about this. It's like, all right, whatever, it's one seat. Except when you have such a narrow majority and you have such a fractured majority, every single seat matters. So when Marjorie Taylor Greene, as I talked about last week, when she resigns her seat in January, that will make it 213 to 218. And a Democrat is going to be elected in a special election in Texas on January 31st. That would bring the total up to 214 to 218, and then you would have to add to each side whoever wins in Tennessee. Since Republicans have such a narrow majority in the House, every seat they lose creates problems for them. And I'm not going to get into the hypotheticals for now, but we'll know who won very soon, and I'm going to talk about that next week. As I said, I still expect Republicans to hold on to the seat, but this margin of victory will be dramatically reduced. Next, we have to talk about the Mark Kelly sedition investigation. You might be wondering, what's this all about? Well, let's set some definitions. Sedition is speech or organization that promotes rebellion against an established government order. So, in order for an act to be sedition, it must be conspiracy to overthrow, put down, or destroy the U.S. government by force, to prevent, hinder, or delay an execution of any U.S. law by force, or seize any property of the U.S. government by force. So what happened and how is Mark Kelly involved? Well, Mark Kelly is a senator from Arizona. He's been a member of the Senate for 5 years. He was in a video, and I'm not going to play it here. You can view it in the description if you're interested. I have a Facebook link from somebody else who was in the video. He was in a video where lawmakers urged the military service members to disobey legal orders. Defense/War Secretary Pete Hegseth has called these members the Seditious Six and has categorized their message as despicable, reckless, and false. This group included various senators and representatives. However, the ire is mostly focused on Senator Kelly because 5 out of 6 of them are protected under the First Amendment. Since Kelly was a member of the military and still holds a Navy rank, he has the highest rank that you can get in the Navy, he could be court-martialed. He is still subject to the Uniform Code of Military Justice because of his rank and his former military service. However, using it against someone who isn't an active member of the military would be very unusual. The case would probably be tossed. The video itself, I believe, was wrong, and they shouldn't have done it. As I said, I'm not going to play for you here, but if you want to watch it, it's in the description. President Trump has meanwhile said that these people are traitors to our country and should be arrested and put on trial. He also posted, "Their words cannot be allowed to stand. We won't have a country anymore. An example must be set." Now, here's the problem. When you say that Democrats are a traitor to your country no matter what they do, you kind of lose your edge. If you say that all the time, then you're not really, if you know what I mean, like it kind of if it gets worse, then you're not going to have more language to escalate onto. So he says this about Democrats all the time. And even if they had said something a lot tamer, he would have still said the same thing. And while I don't think it's bad in my opinion, what they did was wrong. And it undermines the president as commander-in-chief. Republicans did not do this about Joe Biden. And if they did, I would have condemned that. So, really don't know what the administration should do about this. This investigation stuff is probably a political stunt, and it won't lead anywhere. Normally, I have very, very strong opinions about people who try to undermine our country. But I don't think this is as serious as some in the MAGA media have made this out to be. Moving abroad, internationally, President Trump released, and I say released, I believe it was leaked, a 28-point plan for peace in Ukraine. This is our lead story. And I'm not going to be able to get everything in the plan, but here are some of the main points in that plan, and then I'm going to provide some of my thoughts. So the plan is leaked, as I suggested. Some of it was slimmed down to a 19-point plan that Russia is reportedly not satisfied with. The second plan is not public, only a few details are, so we'll kind of go through it together. Number 1 is a promise that Ukraine, Russia, and Europe will play nice, basically. Check, that's good with me. Ukraine receive reliable security guarantees. It's kind of vague, but Axios reported that there is a separate document which says the U.S. and its NATO allies would treat an attack on Ukraine as an attack on the entire transatlantic community. I'm not interested in that. Army would have to be reduced 30%, down 300,000 troops to 600,000. Ukraine supposedly removed this from the 19-point plan. I don't think that's a good idea either. Number 4, Ukraine won't join NATO. There should be no NATO troops in Ukraine, although this was reportedly removed from the agreement in the new 19-point plan. I do think that would actually be a good idea. Number 5 is that European fighter jets would be in Poland, not American fighter jets. Sounds good to me. Number 6, the U.S. will receive compensation for security guarantees. This could be a bit of a problem, and I'll explain this in a little bit. Number 7, Ukraine can join the EU. Sounds good to me. There's some stuff about the reconstruction of Ukraine. That's obviously doesn't have to do with the military side of it. And then number 9 is that Russia be reintegrated into the global economy, including back into the G8. Not a good idea. Number 10, $100 billion of Russia's frozen assets be used to rebuild Ukraine, with U.S. receiving 50% of the profits, and Ukraine would be given $100 billion from Europe. Sounds like a good idea to me. Number 11 is Russia must comply to the agreement. Obviously, that's a good idea. U.S., Ukraine, and Russia should restart cooperation for nuclear non-proliferation. That basically means that we don't want the nuclear weapons to use to get out of control. So that's a good idea. And then number 13 is energy from the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant be split between Ukraine and Russia. That's not a good idea. Yeah, Zaporizhia is right on the border. Don't think that's a good idea to have two basically enemies sharing a nuclear power plant. Number 14, Russia and Ukraine start educational training programs to promote mutual understanding. That doesn't mean anything. That's not happening. And then number 15 this is the most controversial. Ukraine must give up its remaining territory in the Donbass region to create a buffer zone. This, in my opinion, would be unacceptable. Number 16, neither side should violate the deal, obviously. Number 17, the Dnipro River should be only used for trade. That makes sense. A committee to organize prisoner exchange and family reunification makes sense. Number 19, Ukraine must hold elections within 100 days. That makes sense as well. That 100 days could be a little tricky. 20, both sides received total amnesty for war crimes. This was changed a little bit in the later deal. Number 21, they implemented a peace plan, or peace council headed up by Trump. And number 22, an immediate ceasefire. And then some of those combine some of the points, but it's 28 points. Those are 22. Some of them are combined, but that should give you the gist of it. So, unsurprisingly, Kiev was furious when this deal came out, although they have softened their rhetoric and accepted the core terms of the agreement, and they did renegotiate it. I suspect this is because there are still many things in the deal that need to be negotiated further, as I said, such as a non-aggression pact, what would that look like, or sanctions relief, or what packages that could be given to Ukraine to rebuild itself. And possibly they wanted to initially agree to it to put pressure on Russia for a ceasefire, and then whittle down the deal in the future. And it seems that's what they ended up doing. It doesn't seem that Putin is super thrilled about this deal either. He said Russia would not agree to a ceasefire unless the deal had been ironed out. So the tricky thing is, it seems like the Ukrainians and the Americans want a ceasefire first, while Russia wants to have a peace plan in place, then commit a ceasefire, or have a ceasefire, which makes sense because Russia is currently the one that has the upper hand at the moment. And reportedly, they did amend it, as I said, but there's not much information about what was changed, and I am pretty sure Russia is not going to accept it. And as for me, I know if I were president, I would be completely against this, and I can't see Europe supporting this either. And why am I opposed to this? Well, I don't believe there is enough to ensure Ukraine's security in the future. And why does this matter? Because if Ukraine's security remains compromised, as it was prior to 2022, Russia will invade again. And that would mean another costly war for all of us. And whether or not we like it, we are engaged in a hybrid war with Russia. It is a war that the only thing that we haven't done yet is place our own troops in Ukraine. We haven't done that yet. And hopefully we never will. Europe would also not support this because they would consider this to be extortion. Trump is telling Europe if he wants our support, they must pay up. Which, in my opinion, is actually very fair. But I can see why they wouldn't support it. Secondly, as a deep isolationist, anything that ties us to the security of Ukraine is a terrible idea. We need to be drawing down our international commitments, not deepening them. We need to keep our fiscal powder dry, especially in case we get into a recession. And third, the fundamental problem of this deal, as all of the other previous ones, is that it forces the victim to go to the negotiating table as opposed to the aggressor. Russia's economy is not doing so hot at the moment, and I know people have been saying this for 3.5 long years, but eventually the economy is going to cave. War is always inflationary, and creating products just to have them blown to bits on a battlefield does not grow your economy in any way. And that would be the only way to beat inflation, would be to grow your economy. And to create a bunch of things and then have them blown to bits is not going to grow your economy. Fourth, and I believe any country at the very bedrock of its existence must be able to guarantee its own security. That's absolutely fundamental. Asking Ukraine to continue to exist without guarantee of its own security, and by the way, I've said this about the war in Gaza, both Israel and a future state of Palestine would have to be able to secure its own borders. Asking Ukraine to do that is like trying to buy a house that has no front door, and it's not sustainable. The problem is Russia would never agree to a secure Ukraine. Therefore, that's why I would tell Europe, this is your continent, it is your problem. And they need to begin relying on their own resources to build their own security, because as I said, countries should be able to guarantee their own security. It's going to be tough for them because they are a continent facing recession, but it was a big mistake for them to rely on the Americans for decades. It was a huge mistake. And think about this. And if you're, especially the people on the left, if you're listening to this and you're a little wary about this, remember most European countries have universal health care and we're giving them money. It should be the other way around. Moving on, speaking of the economy, there was a survey of economists in the National Association of Business Economics, which had alarming studies, and I want to highlight that here. Before I go on, this is a poll of economists, and economics is not an exact science like biology or physics. However, broadly, it aligns with what I am expecting. It was a poll of 42 economists, and it was conducted a couple of weeks ago. It shows that the median outlook for growth is 2% next year, and that's for all of 2026. It's a bit higher than back in October, and it's much higher than back in June. But I think a lot of economists and people have realized that tariffs would not be quite as apocalyptic as people predicted back in the spring. Also, back in June, tariffs were much higher, and there was a lot more uncertainty over the spring and early summer. As a rule of thumb, the more unpredictable it is, the more pessimistic forecasts tend to be. The rule with oil, anyway, is that oil hates turmoil. Is this a bad thing? Growth of 2%? No, normally not. 2% would actually be decently solid growth. It's a little low, but it's not super low. In a low inflationary environment, it would be a good thing. The idea is to have inflation lower than growth. However, inflation is sticky and it remains at about 3%. So yes, this is bad because they are expecting inflation to remain at 2.9%. And I've been closely following economics for the last 4 years or so, really since the inflation problem began a couple of years ago. And I remember reading a few years ago that because of a strong labor market we had at that time and supply chain issues we had at that time, that would be a problem. It would be a problem to get inflation back to 2%. And since then, those problems have actually been almost completely fixed. It's mostly geopolitics that's creating issues, as well as our own economic policy. I don't remember the exact article, so you'll have to take my word on it, but it was a prevailing concern at the time in about early 2023. So what does that mean? If inflation is at 2.9%, but our economy is only growing at 2%, if indeed that comes to pass, well, that is a bad sign because it shows that's nearly 1% real terms cut. For those who don't follow economics, real terms just means adjusted for inflation. If your wages go up 1%, but prices go up 2%, things are more expensive than if your wages went up 4%, say. The same thing applies here. This means, and I don't mean to scare anyone, I never mean to do that, we will be about 1% poorer than we are this year, unless wages are also growing by 3%, which is possible. I would say that could happen, but nationally we would be poorer. The unemployment rate is expected to remain at about 4.5%, which is a touch above what is desirable. Usually 4% is considered the golden era. Anything below that actually is inflationary, and above that is actually deflationary. But they expect about 65,000 jobs to be added a month, which shows a labor market which is broadly flat and stuck in neutral, to use car terms. And more broadly, not individual industries. It's really tough to say because we are getting mixed signals. In September, for example, we added 119,000 jobs, which was well above expectations. That's the last month we have government data on. We're not going to get October's because of the shutdown. ADP, however, a private company, they really only focus on private data, and their numbers are usually a little bit below government data, and it shows that the private sector actually shed jobs in November, which is not a good sign. The strongest industries appear to be healthcare, bars and restaurants, and social assistance. At least that's what the government report said. The weakest industries are transportation, warehousing, federal government, and professional business services. There is a whole other factor we haven't even discussed yet on this show, and that's the AI bubble. And I'll be the first to admit I am not remotely qualified to explain why it looks like a bubble or what happens if it does burst. But what I do know is that AI is taking up an increasing slice of the pie in terms of the economic growth. And if that does burst, then we are going to be in recession, almost certainly. So my non-expert assessment is that Main Street is not quite in recession yet, but it is stagnant. It is not a boom for businesses or average Americans. It's also not a glut. Wall Street continues to boom and AI is growing rapidly. That's kind of the other side of the equation here. And that's usually a recipe for a recession. And maybe that'll come next year. We'll have to wait and see. Although I will say this has been the longest anticipated recession I think I've ever heard of. And I started hearing people talking in 2021 about a recession, and that was 4.5 years ago. And I remember reading an article in 2022 saying that a recession within the next year was a 100% certainty, and that obviously never happened. So lastly, moving on, forgive me for not talking about this sooner, but I'm still not quite sure what the political impacts are going to be on this. I can't imagine there will be many, but tragically, there were 2 West Virginia National Guard members who were attacked outside the White House last week, the day before Thanksgiving, and one of them has tragically died, and the other is in critical condition. The person who attacked them was an Afghan national who came in under the failure administration 4 years ago during the collapse of Afghanistan. And I will say that this is something back then. I remember the collapse of Afghanistan pretty well. I remember watching on TV while I was on vacation, the government completely collapsed. And this was something that people on the right warned about, and they were right. Sometimes the right is right because it's a clues in the title. They said that letting Afghan refugees in by the thousands was very risky, and they were right. However, I can't blame all of that on the Biden administration, because it was the Trump administration back in April, actually, that granted this guy asylum. So, and notice the pattern here. As we get further and further away from the Biden administration's time in office, there's going to be less and less we can blame them for. If this attack happened back in March, then it would have been completely on Biden. Except that's not the case. The Trump administration granted this man asylum. And yeah, he came in under Biden, but the Trump administration granted him asylum. And to be fair to the administration, they did try to deport all these people, and a court issued an injunction, but they still granted this guy asylum. And this also attack, let me talk about the elephant in the room. The attack would not have happened if Trump had not put the National Guard in D.C. And I'm not going to get into that aspect. I talked about that before, but instead I want to focus on the reaction before we wrap up for the day. And Trump, in response, has vowed to permanently pause all visa applications from the third world. And this is something I called for months ago. Not exactly sure when. I believe it was in June. It wouldn't have prevented this attack because the guy was already in the country. But we should not be allowing entry from the third world. There's no reason to be doing that. Most European countries, especially Western Europe, maybe not Eastern Europe, but Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Taiwan, Japan, Israel, and South Korea, they should be the only people coming into this country. And the reason why is most of the other people from other countries, especially in like Africa and Latin America, most of them are not skilled workers, and they have a very high chance of overstaying their visa. Some of them are close to 40-50%. So there's no need to let them into this country. And then once they overstay their visas, now they're illegal immigrants, and we have to go and deport them. Notice something, though. These are all U.S. allies, or at least they are U.S.-friendly nations. As I said, there's no need to have people from the third world in this country. The question is the Trump administration going to follow through on it? I'm not so sure. They've already paused or restricted applications from several countries. They did it a couple of months ago. But I don't see this happening. I don't really see much changing here. And the administration did just pause Afghanistan. But my question is, as always, is why wasn't this done on January 20th at 12:01 p.m.? This could have been done on day one. And Trump says permanently pause. Except even the language is a bit of a problem here, because pauses are not permanent. Pauses are temporary. This was also done by executive action. And the problem with executive action is once the Newsom administration takes office over on January 20th, 2029, they can completely undo it. If Trump wants to cement this as a part of his legacy, he must get this passed through Congress before Democrats take control. And I would say, don't focus on anything else. They don't have anything else on their legislative agenda. Rumors are they're going to talk about healthcare. God willing, they won't, because last time they did that was a terrible idea. But instead, I believe they should focus on immigration reform, because if they don't, Democrats are going to do it, and Republicans are not going to like it. All right, well, that is basically it for this episode. We're not quite done. But before we conclude, looking ahead to the next few weeks, there will be an episode next week on December 8th, as usual, but there's not going to be an episode on December 15th. I'm graduating college on the 13th. I'm getting 2 degrees, one in political science, the other in public administration, which I think gives me the right to talk about some of this stuff, at least some of the time. And I've never taken a week off before in the last year and a half. I've always been here every Monday, and usually more than that. So if anything, I think college graduation is a great time to take a week off. So hopefully you agree with me. So once again, we will have an episode next week, but not the week after, and I will remind you next week as well. Also, once again, please check out my books in the description. That is all for this episode. Thank you for tuning in as always. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below, and I will be sure to respond to it. Bye-bye.